in our Brooklyn home, Danny Kaye was God. My parents, on their honeymoon, went to the White Row Lake Hotel in the Catskills, and Danny Kaye was a kid. He was the tumler. What is a tumler? A tumler is the kid that the management of the hotel hires maybe for just room and board, and he's there to amuse the people in case it gets rainy, in case there's a show on a Saturday night. He is like the clown guy, and when he started making it in Lady in the Dark, my parents said, "That's the kid. This is Daniel Kaminsky, who is he called himself Danny Kaye now. Oh, gee, he's stealing the show from Gertrude Lawrence." And then he starts doing these movies, The Kid from Brooklyn, Hans Christian Andersen, all of these amazing, 40 feet high, with his blondish reddish hair and his brilliant virtuoso stuff. And I grew up doing his records. I said, Danny Kaye, this is Danny Kaye. And I got to, I'm hired on the Danny Kaye show. I said, oh my God, this is too much. So I was so intimidated I could barely speak. Danny Kaye, gee whiz. I made a horrible mistake on the Danny Kaye show. I got a laugh doing my Latino accent. He was not happy with that. What I didn't understand right away was that he had to be the virtuoso and everybody else had to be the straight man, feeding him. Eventually, I was dumped because he was unhappy with that. But it was a good lesson for me. Getting fired turned out to be good because I understood, don't mess with the star of the show. Conversely, working with Steve Allen and working with Jack Benny in 1962, Jack Benny surrounded himself with brilliant comedians, and he was very much the straight man for it. But he of course, he with his sense of timing and his brilliance, but he had Dennis Day and teams of brilliant writers. Dennis Day, one of Dennis Day's lines, and he had this pretended to be cheap. Dennis Day said, "Oh, I love it when Mr. Benny invites us over to his home for dinner, but the food is so great and the prices are so reasonable." But Jack Benny had this brilliant show, and he understood that whoever gets the laugh on the Jack Benny show amplifies the show, enriches the show. But Danny Kaye never understood that. He had to be the only one getting the laugh. And it turned out to be unfortunate for his career. As his career went on after his show, he tried to do 2 by 2 on Broadway. That didn't work out too well. And apparently Doug Kramer, who was one of the executive producers of Love Boat, and had some conversation with Danny Kaye. That Danny Kaye was under the impression that he was going to do his a two-part show, his Giovanni Italian character. It didn't work out. So there was some lovely event at the Beverly Wilshire, and I was at our table, and I went across to have a little spritz with Pat Harrington, and I come back, and Danny Kaye is having a big argument with Doug Kramer, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and Danny Kaye was very upset, and I hear, and the whole room heard, and he's yelling at Doug Kramer. He says, "Because you're full of shit!" And that was a very tragic thing, and really an ending where he really painted himself into a corner.
Was that on the Love Boat he was hoping to do?
Yes.
That character?
Yes. It didn't work out because comedy keeps changing. Harvey and I went to see him during his big time at the Desert Inn. And Winston Churchill, the Premier of England, saw Danny Kaye's act, and he said he plays the audience like an organ. He was so brilliant as a stand-up, and that was really referring back to his time as a tummler. But comedy changed, and he was left out in the cold, and he died a very bitter man, a tragic. So that was my experience with Danny Kaye.